I grew up in a household where favoritism wasn't just a bad habit, it was a way of life. My younger brother, Ryan, was the golden child, adored by our mother and seemingly capable of doing no wrong. She would dote on him endlessly, making his favorite meals, doing his laundry, and excusing his every misstep. Me? I was the afterthought, the older son expected to be self-sufficient and reliable. I don't think I minded it at first, at least not consciously. I liked being independent, keeping to myself, and excelling in school. But Ryan made sure I never forgot where I stood. Ryan wasn't just the favorite. He was also the loudest, boldest, and, at times, cruelest person I knew. From the time we were kids, he had a knack for finding my vulnerabilities and exploiting them for his amusement. If I wore glasses, he called me Four Eyes. If I struggled in gym class, he'd make a point of mocking me in front of my peers. Once, when I wrote about feeling lonely in my journal, he snuck into my room, read it, and shared it with our mother. Instead of scolding him, she brushed it off, saying, "He's just playing around. Boys will be boys." The older we got, the worse it became. Ryan started pushing boundaries in ways that went beyond teasing. He once put hot sauce in my water bottle, laughing hysterically as I gagged on it. Another time, he dumped salt into my cereal. He even tried to set my hair on fire during an argument over something as trivial as a TV remote. That was the first time Dad got involved. Up until that point, Dad was more of a bystander, always working long hours, coming home late, and avoiding household drama. But when Ryan nearly hurt me for real, Dad finally stepped in and made it clear that his behavior wouldn't be tolerated. I remember that night vividly. After Ryan stormed off to his room, sulking as usual, Dad came to talk to me. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking tired, like he was carrying the weight of the entire family on his shoulders. "I've been too soft on him," he admitted, his voice low. "I thought he'd grow out of it, but maybe I was wrong. I'm sorry, son. I should have done more." Hearing those words felt like a lifeline. For years, I'd been carrying the burden of Ryan's bullying alone, thinking no one else saw it or cared. Dad's acknowledgement meant everything. I told him about the years of insults, pranks, and invasions of privacy, how Ryan encouraged other kids at school to bully me, and how he'd once told me to kill myself during an argument. I hadn't planned to tell him all of it, but once I started, it poured out. Dad listened quietly, his expression growing darker with each story. By the time I finished, he looked genuinely angry, not at me, but at himself for letting it get this far. The next day, Dad made good on his promise to step up. He called my school and met with the principal, ensuring the bullies who targeted me knew there would be serious consequences if they didn't stop. That evening, he enrolled me in martial arts classes at a nearby gym. "You need to learn how to stand up for yourself," he said. At first, I was skeptical. I'd never been the athletic type, and the thought of stepping into a gym full of people who probably saw me as an easy target was terrifying. But something about Dad's tone made me want to try. Those classes changed everything. Over the next few months, I started to build strength, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time, I felt like I had some control over my life. Ryan noticed the shift, though he didn't say anything at first. His usual pranks and insults started to taper off, like he wasn't sure how to handle the new version of me. Then came the day when he pushed too far. I'd been saving my allowance for weeks to buy a new pair of headphones, and Ryan, as usual, decided he was entitled to take it. I caught him sneaking out the door with the money and confronted him. He laughed in my face. "What are you gonna do about it?" he sneered. "Run crying to Dad?" I didn't know what came over me, but before I could think twice, I punched him. It wasn't a hard punch. I wasn't trying to hurt him, just to make him understand he couldn't keep treating me like this. He fell back, stunned, and I grabbed the money from his pocket. For the first time, Ryan looked genuinely afraid of me. Of course, my mother came rushing out when she heard the commotion. She immediately took Ryan's side, scolding me for acting violent and demanding I apologize. Ryan, ever the drama queen, milked it for all it was worth, claiming I'd attacked him unprovoked. But this time, Dad wasn't buying it. He made both of us sit down and explain what happened. When he heard that Ryan had stolen from me, he didn't mince words. "You're lucky he only punched you," Dad said. "If it were anyone else, they'd call the cops." Ryan sulked off to his room, slamming the door and yelling about how much he hated me. That was the last time he tried to physically intimidate me. He couldn't use fear anymore, so he switched to passive-aggressive insults and petty behavior. He'd ignore me at the dinner table, mutter under his breath whenever I entered a room, and use our mom as a go-between if he needed anything. It was exhausting, but at least he'd stopped openly bullying me. By the time I graduated high school, I was ready to leave that house and never look back. I'd earned a full scholarship to a university across the country, and the day I moved out felt like escaping a prison. My dad threw me a small party to celebrate, but Ryan barely showed his face. He sat in the corner, arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. As I packed my things into the car, he didn't even bother to say goodbye. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was free. College felt like stepping into an entirely different world. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Ryan to mess with me. It was liberating. I threw myself into my studies, joined a few clubs, and made friends who actually liked me for who I was. The toxic cloud that had hung over my childhood finally started to lift. During my second year, I met Anna. She was a friend of a friend, and we clicked almost immediately. Anna was warm, funny, and sharp in a way that made every conversation with her feel like a challenge. She had this ability to pull me out of my shell, making me laugh and forget all the baggage I carried. For the first time, I felt like I could trust someone completely. We started dating a few weeks later. It wasn't like the movies, where everything is instant fireworks and passion. It was quieter, steadier, a feeling of comfort and belonging that grew stronger every time we were together. Anna came from a close-knit family, something I envied but didn't fully understand. She had a younger sister she adored, parents who still held hands, and an uncanny ability to make you feel at home wherever you were. As we got closer, I told her bits and pieces about my past. At first, I hesitated, unsure if she'd judge me for how dysfunctional my family was. But Anna didn't flinch. When I told her about Ryan's bullying, she just squeezed my hand and said, "You didn't deserve that." Simple words, but they meant everything. For the first time, someone validated what I'd been through without trying to downplay it or make excuses for Ryan. By our senior year, we were practically inseparable. We talked about the future constantly, where we wanted to live, what kind of jobs we'd get, and whether we'd adopt a dog or a cat. For the first time, I started to believe in the possibility of a happy, stable life. It didn't feel like a fantasy anymore. It felt real. But life, as I was beginning to learn, has a way of throwing curveballs just when you think you've figured it out. It was a chilly October evening when Anna called me, her voice shaking. She'd been feeling off for a few weeks, tired, nauseous, emotional, and had finally taken a pregnancy test. It was positive. My mind went blank for a moment, and when I finally spoke, all I could manage was, "Are you sure?" She was. The test was sitting on her bathroom counter, a tiny plastic thing that had just upended both of our lives. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the weight of it sinking in. Then she said, "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. I was terrified of disappointing her, of failing as a father, of repeating the mistakes my parents had made. But when I looked at Anna, I realized she was just as scared as I was, and that fear somehow grounded me. I reached for her hand and said, "We'll figure it out. Together." Anna nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, and for the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the future we'd planned, but it was ours, and we'd make it work. We got married a month after graduation in a small ceremony at her parents' house. My mom cried during the vows, but not because she was happy. She hated that Anna and I had decided against a big church wedding. My dad, thankfully, was supportive. He pulled me aside after the reception and said, "I'm proud of you. You're stepping up." It wasn't much, but coming from him, it meant the world. Ryan, of course, was barely there. He showed up late, dressed like he was going to a backyard barbecue, and left as soon as the cake was cut. He didn't even bother congratulating us. Anna noticed and asked me later, "What's his deal?" I just shook my head and said, "That's Ryan." It wasn't worth explaining. After the wedding, Anna and I moved into a tiny apartment just outside the city. I got a job at a tech startup, and Anna stayed home with the baby. Those early days were hard. Money was tight, and we were both exhausted all the time. But there were moments of pure joy that made it all worth it. Holding our son, Ethan, for the first time was one of those moments. He was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and these bright, curious eyes that made me feel like I'd do anything to protect him. For a while, it felt like things were finally falling into place. Anna and I were happy, Ethan was healthy, and I was building a life that felt like my own. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that peace doesn't last forever. The cracks started small, little things that I dismissed as stress or exhaustion. A late night at work here, a vague excuse there. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. The cracks that had started as barely noticeable crevices widened into fractures I couldn't ignore. At first, I told myself it was just the strain of new parenthood. Anna was home with Ethan all day, and I was working long hours at the startup, trying to prove myself. We were tired, stretched thin, and rarely had time for each other. It made sense that things felt off. But then the excuses started piling up. Anna was running errands at odd hours, often leaving her phone behind. She'd come home distracted, distant, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Once, I noticed a text pop up on her lock screen while she was in the shower. It was from someone named Elle, and the message was short, "Can't wait to see you again." I froze, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. When Anna came out, I asked her about it, trying to sound casual. "Hey, who's Elle?" She barely hesitated. "Oh, that's Lauren from my book club. We're meeting next week." Why? I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she said it, too smooth, too rehearsed, didn't sit right. Still, I pushed the doubt aside. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the years of distrust I'd learned from my family were clouding my judgment. But the unease didn't go away. It simmered, bubbling up in quiet moments when I caught her staring off into space or laughing too hard at a text she refused to share. I started paying closer attention, and the more I noticed, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. Anna had gone out to grab groceries hours earlier, and Ethan was napping in his crib. I decided to clean up around the apartment, trying to distract myself from the growing knot in my stomach. While tidying the bedroom, I found a crumpled receipt in the pocket of her coat. It wasn't from the grocery store. It was from a hotel, dated the previous Tuesday. My hands shook as I stared at it, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd gone there to meet a friend. Maybe. I didn't know. I couldn't finish the thought because deep down, I already knew the truth. When Anna got home, I didn't wait. I didn't let her settle in or put the groceries away. I just held up the receipt and asked, "What is this?" Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she sighed, setting the bags down on the counter. "I was going to tell you," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "Tell me what?" She didn't look at me. "That I've been seeing someone. It's not serious, I swear. It just happened. It just happened." Like she tripped and fell into someone else's arms. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. All the late nights, the excuses, the vague answers. It all made sense now. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might lie. But then she said, "It's someone I met at the gym." I laughed bitterly, though nothing about the situation was funny. "The gym? You haven't been to the gym in months." She winced, like she'd been caught in another lie. "Okay, it's someone I used to know. It doesn't matter who. It's over now." "It doesn't matter?" I said, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and it doesn't matter?" Anna started crying then, begging me to forgive her. She said it was a mistake, that she loved me, that it would never happen again. But I couldn't hear her over the roaring in my ears. All I could think about was how hard I'd worked to build a life for us, to give Ethan a stable home, and how easily she'd thrown it all away. I left that night. I couldn't stand to be in the same space as her. I grabbed a bag, kissed Ethan on the forehead, and walked out the door, ignoring Anna's pleas to stay. I spent the night in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling and wondering how the hell my life had come to this. The next few weeks were a blur of anger, confusion, and sadness. Anna kept trying to reach out, apologizing over and over, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't sure if I ever would be. Eventually, I agreed to meet her at a cafe to talk. She looked nervous, like she knew how close she was to losing everything. She told me she'd ended things with the other guy and wanted to work on our marriage. I made a mistake, she said, but I want to fix it, for us, for Ethan. I stared at her, trying to figure out if I still believed her. She looked so sincere, so desperate to make things right. Part of me wanted to take her back, to put this behind us and pretend it never happened. But another part of me, the part that remembered every lie, every doubt, wasn't so sure. Do you even love me? I asked finally. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I do. I swear I do. I wanted to believe her. For Ethan's sake, if nothing else. So I said, okay. But if this happens again, we're done? No second chances? Anna promised it wouldn't, and for a while, things got better. But deep down, I knew the foundation of our marriage had been cracked, and no matter how hard we tried to patch it, the damage was already done. For a while, it felt like things might actually work out. Anna seemed genuinely remorseful, and she put in the effort to rebuild my trust. She stayed home more, focused on Ethan, and went out of her way to communicate better. For a few months, I thought we might be able to move past everything. I convinced myself that people made mistakes and that forgiveness was part of marriage. But that lingering doubt, that tiny, gnawing voice in the back of my mind, never went away. It didn't help that Ryan re-entered the picture around this time. He'd been keeping his distance ever since I moved out for college, but suddenly, he started showing up again. At first, it was small things, a text here, a comment on social media there. Then, one day, he called out of the blue, saying he was in town and wanted to catch up. I was hesitant. Ryan and I had never truly repaired our relationship, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. But part of me thought maybe he'd changed. People grow up, right? I agreed to meet him for coffee. When I saw him, it was like no time had passed. He was the same Ryan. Charming, self-assured, and just a little too cocky. He made a show of asking about my life, about Anna and Ethan, but it felt more like he was gathering information than genuinely caring. I tried to keep the conversation light, avoiding any mention of Anna's affair or the struggles in our marriage. The last thing I needed was Ryan knowing how fragile everything was. After that, he started showing up more often. He came by the house one weekend, unannounced, claiming he wanted to see Ethan. Anna seemed surprised to see him, but welcomed him in with her usual warmth. Watching them interact was strange. Ryan was unusually polite to her, almost overly friendly. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then it started happening more frequently. Ryan would drop by when I wasn't home, claiming he was in the neighborhood. Anna didn't seem to think it was a big deal, but it rubbed me the wrong way. One evening, I came home to find them in the living room, laughing about some joke I'd walked in on. When I asked what was so funny, they both gave vague answers. After he left, I told Anna I wasn't comfortable with how often he was around. It's just Ryan, she said, waving it off. He's your brother. I thought you'd be happy he's trying to reconnect. I wasn't. Something about the whole situation felt off, but I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like the jealous husband or the bitter older brother. So I let it go. A few weeks later, I came home early from work and found Ryan's car in the driveway. My stomach sank as I parked and walked up to the house. Inside, I found Anna and Ryan sitting at the kitchen table, deep in conversation. They both looked up, startled, when I walked in. Hey, Anna said, her voice a little too bright. You're home early. What's going on? I asked, looking between them. Nothing, Ryan said, leaning back in his chair. Just catching up. I stared at him, trying to read his expression, but he just gave me his usual smirk, the one he always wore when he thought he was getting away with something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering if I was imagining things, or if there really was something going on. The next day, I told Anna I didn't want Ryan coming over anymore. She looked at me like I just suggested kicking out a puppy. What? Why? Because I don't trust him, I said bluntly. She frowned. He's your brother. He's trying to make amends. Why are you so against that? I wanted to tell her everything, to lay out the years of bullying, manipulation, and cruelty that Ryan had put me through. But I didn't. Instead, I just said, I have my reasons. Anna sighed but didn't argue further. Ryan stopped coming around after that, but I could tell Anna wasn't happy about it. She was quieter, more distant, and it felt like we were drifting apart all over again. Then, 3 months later, everything came crashing down. It was a Tuesday evening, and Anna had taken Ethan to visit her parents for the day. I was cleaning up around the house when her phone buzzed on the counter. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Ryan. I miss you. Can we talk? My hands started shaking as I unlocked her phone. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't care. I scrolled through the messages, and what I found confirmed my worst fears. They'd been texting for months, meeting up behind my back, and, judging by some of the messages, taking things much further than just talking. My chest felt tight as I sat down, scrolling through the evidence of their betrayal. Every message was like a dagger, cutting deeper and deeper. When Anna came home later that night, I was waiting for her. I didn't say anything at first. I just handed her the phone and watched as her face crumpled. I can explain, she started, but I cut her off. Don't. Just don't. She started crying, but I didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, just numbness. How could you do this? I asked quietly. After everything, how could you do this with him? She didn't have an answer. I packed my things that night and left. I didn't tell her where I was going, and I didn't care if she tried to reach me. I was done. Ryan had taken everything from me, again, and this time, I wasn't going to let him back into my life. In the days following my discovery, I moved into a small apartment across town. It was a far cry from the life I'd built with Anna, but it felt like the only place I could breathe. I didn't tell her where I was staying, though she bombarded me with messages and calls, all of which I ignored. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or her apologies. Ryan, unsurprisingly, stayed silent. Not a single call, not a single text. I'm sure he figured it was better to keep his distance, knowing I was one step away from showing up on his doorstep to knock him into next week. My parents didn't know what had happened yet, but I knew I couldn't keep it from them for long. Ryan had a way of twisting stories in his favor, and I wanted them to hear the truth from me first. When I finally called my dad, it was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. He listened quietly as I laid it all out. The texts, the betrayal, the months of sneaking around behind my back. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when I finished. Then, finally, he said, I always knew Ryan had his issues, but this is something else entirely. My dad's anger wasn't loud or explosive. It was cold, simmering just beneath the surface, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Ryan felt the full weight of it. My mom, on the other hand, was devastated. When I told her, she cried, clutching the phone as if her tears could somehow patch up the gaping hole in our family. Are you sure? She kept asking, like she couldn't believe it. I saw the messages, Mom, I said. It's not a misunderstanding. It's exactly what it looks like. She didn't defend Ryan the way she might have in the past, but I could tell she was struggling to accept it. He's your brother, she said softly. This is going to tear us apart. He's the one who did that, I said, my voice colder than I intended. Not me. The fallout was swift and messy. My dad confronted Ryan a few days later, and from what I heard, it didn't go well. Ryan, true to form, denied everything at first, calling Anna a liar and me overly sensitive. But when Dad brought up the texts, evidence I'd forwarded to him, Ryan's excuses fell apart. You've crossed the line, Ryan, Dad told him. You've been crossing lines your whole life, and I'm done cleaning up after you. You're on your own now. That was the last time Ryan stepped foot in my parents' house. My dad cut him off financially, freezing the college fund he'd been helping Ryan use for grad school and refusing to support him any further. Ryan tried to argue, claiming he'd been misunderstood, but my dad shut him down. For the first time in his life, Ryan was truly alone. As for Anna, she kept trying to contact me, pleading for another chance. It was a mistake, she wrote in one of her texts. I love you, not him. Please, don't let this ruin everything we've built. But how could I believe her? She'd already betrayed me once, and I'd forgiven her then. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, one she'd made again and again, knowing full well what it would cost. Eventually, I told her I wanted a divorce. Her response was predictable: tears, promises, and more excuses. "Think about Ethan," she said. "He needs his dad. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Her words tugged at something deep inside me. I hated the thought of leaving Ethan, of breaking up the family I'd worked so hard to build. But I couldn't stay, not after everything. Staying would mean living a lie, pretending to forgive her while knowing I never truly could. The divorce process was brutal. Anna tried to fight for custody, but her affair with Ryan worked heavily in my favor. The judge ruled for joint custody, but I got primary residence, something I hadn't expected but was deeply grateful for. The idea of Ethan spending too much time with Anna and, by extension, Ryan, made my skin crawl. When the divorce was finalized, it felt like both a relief and a loss. I'd spent so many years envisioning a future with Anna, and now that future was gone. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally start to rebuild. Ryan, meanwhile, spiraled. Word about his affair with Anna spread quickly through our extended family, and no one wanted to be associated with him. My mom tried to stay in touch with him, but every time she did, it caused a fight with my dad. Eventually, she stopped bringing him up, though I could tell she was still struggling to reconcile her love for her son with her disappointment in who he'd become. The last I heard, Ryan had dropped out of grad school and was working a dead-end job to make ends meet. He and Anna were apparently living together, raising Ethan as if they were some happy little family. The thought of it used to fill me with rage, but now, all I feel is pity. Ryan always wanted what I had, but now he's stuck with the scraps: my ex-wife, a broken reputation, and a life he's barely holding together. As for me, I'm doing okay. Some days are harder than others, but I'm learning to be content with the life I have. I spend my weekends with Ethan, taking him to the park, building pillow forts, and trying to be the best dad I can be. It's not the life I envisioned, but it's mine, and for now, that's enough. 6 months after the divorce, I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. Life had settled into a routine. Work was steady, Ethan was thriving, and I was finding my footing as a single dad. But then Ryan called. I stared at his name flashing on my phone, debating whether to answer. I hadn't heard from him since our father cut him off, and I assumed he'd taken the hint to stay out of my life. But curiosity, or maybe a lingering sense of unfinished business, got the better of me. I picked up. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. "Can we talk?" "What do you want, Ryan?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. He sighed, like he was bracing himself. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need help." "Help?" I almost laughed. "You've got some nerve asking me for help after what you did." "I know," he said quickly. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But things aren't great right now." That was an understatement. He sounded tired, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. He went on to tell me how he'd lost his job and couldn't keep up with the bills. Anna was pressuring him to contribute more, and he was struggling to make ends meet. "I'm not asking for money," he said. I don't know what to do. Everyone's turned their back on me." "Can you blame them?" I said. "You betrayed your own brother. You destroyed my marriage, Ryan. You didn't just cross the line. You torched it." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I hate myself for it, okay? I wish I could take it back, but I can't. I'm stuck, and I don't have anyone else to turn to." For a moment, I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let him stew in the mess he'd made. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times we'd had as kids, before everything went wrong, hesitated. "I can't fix this for you," I said finally. "You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. That's life, Ryan. I don't expect you to fix it," he said. I miss having a family. I miss you." The words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. "You didn't miss me when you were sleeping with Anna," I said. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, he said, "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I ended the call without saying goodbye. That night, I sat on the couch, replaying the conversation in my head. For the first time, I wondered if Ryan really was sorry, or if this was just another one of his manipulative tactics. Either way, it didn't matter. I couldn't let him back into my life, not after everything. A few weeks later, my dad called. He'd updated his will, officially leaving everything to me. Ryan's name wasn't even mentioned. He's had enough chances, Dad said. It's time for you to have some peace. I didn't argue. Ryan's downfall became a cautionary tale in our family. He and Anna are still together, from what I hear, though their relationship is far from perfect. My cousin told me they fight constantly, mostly over money. Ryan's bitterness and Anna's dissatisfaction with the life they've built are eating away at them, just like I knew they would. As for me, I've moved on. Not in the everything is perfect now sense, but in the way that matters. I've learned to let go of the anger and focus on what's important: Ethan, my work, and the life I'm building for us. Ryan will always be my brother, but he's no longer my problem. Anna will always be Ethan's mother, but she's no longer my partner. I've drawn my boundaries, and I'm sticking to them. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough.